This is CNN Breaking News.
You are in the CNN newsroom. Hello, everyone. I'm Randy Kay, in for Don Lemon. An American soldier is free today after nearly 5 years of captivity by the Taliban. Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl. Since 2009, he's only been seen in pictures and videos released by his captors. U.S. Special Forces went in and picked him up in eastern Afghanistan today. He was the only member of the U.S. military still held captive from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. At the same time today, 5 detainees held at Guantanamo Bay were released, and they are now in the air en route to Qatar. The exchange, Bergdahl for the terror suspects, followed a negotiation between Taliban representatives and the government of Qatar. We just heard from the White House. They told us to expect President Obama to speak from the Rose Garden about this release of Bowe Bergdahl. That's coming up in just a few minutes at about 6:15 Eastern Time. Meantime, the people closest to Bowe Bergdahl never gave up hope that he would someday come home. Here's CNN's Jake Tapper.
Get me, release me, please. I'm begging you. Bring me home, please. Bring me home.
That is Bowe Bergdahl, the only member of the U.S. military in enemy captivity. Bergdahl had just turned 27, but 4 years of his short life have been spent in captivity, held by a group loosely affiliated with the Afghan Taliban. The Idaho native was captured near the Afghan-Pakistan border after just 2 months on the battlefield. Since his capture, only a few propaganda videos proving he's alive have trickled out.
Given the freedom to exercise.
Bowe's father, Robert, appealed directly to his son's captors in this YouTube video.
I personally appeal to General Kayani and General Pasha. Our family is counting on your professional integrity and honor to secure the safe return of our son. Assalamu alaikum.
In that video, Robert Bergdahl sports a long beard and had learned phrases in Pashtun and Arabic to better communicate directly. New York Times reporter Elizabeth Buemiller spoke to Bergdahl's family as their patience with the government's progress on bringing him home wore thin.
They had become frustrated by the U.S. government. They felt the government was foot-dragging and decided to speak out themselves.
In emails to his family obtained by the late Michael Hastings and published by Rolling Stone magazine, Bergdahl made clear his disillusionment with the war before he disappeared. The future is too good to waste on lies, he wrote to his parents in his final email home.
And his first letters home, emails home, were very positive, but then he said the emails became much darker. His son seemed to feel that the military was not this Peace Corps with guns ideal that he had held up.
But his family received a different kind of letter, believed to be from their son, delivered via the Red Cross.
That brings newfound hope. That's like sitting around a campfire that's going out, and all of a sudden you find that one more log.
We have a team of reporters working on this story for you. CNN Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr and senior international correspondent Nick Robertson. Barbara, let me start with you on this one. What do we know exactly about the negotiations and how they ended up picking up Bowe Bergdahl?
Well, Randy, what we've been understanding from talking to military and defense officials all day long is it was in the last week that this plan with the Taliban basically came together. Bergdahl, in return for 5 detainees from Guantanamo Bay, being released back to Qatar. Qatar would take responsibility for them. That's what the Taliban wanted, and for that they would return Bowe Bergdahl. U.S. Special Forces got the word where to go along the border in Afghanistan to pick him up. They did that earlier today. It all was very peaceful. It went very quickly, but there was plenty of concern about security. We know that other U.S. forces were standing by, ready to move in if things went wrong, but they did not, thankfully. We are told that Bergdahl walked to the helicopter. He was able to walk, that he spoke to the U.S. troops that came to rescue him. I want to tell you that we have some video here now. You are seeing Mr. and Mrs. Bergdahl, his parents, obviously surrounded by security, walking to the White House just a short time ago. This is exclusive CNN video. We were the only ones there to record it. Walking to the White House, we expect them, Robert and Janny Bergdahl, to be standing with President Obama when he makes his statement. Aaron McPike will have much more on that, of course. Bergdahl now at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, expected to be moving in the coming hours perhaps to Landstuhl Military Medical Center in Germany for further medical checks. But the whole idea, Randy, now is to get him back home to his family as quick as possible.
And Nick, in terms of this negotiation, I mean, obviously there was a trade here to get Bowe Bergdahl safe. Does it signal a change in American policy about no negotiations to you?
It's going to raise questions for some people who are not familiar with this. The United States is not the first people to do this. This is standard operating procedure for the Taliban to take prisoners and exchange them for their own prisoners who are being held captive. They do this with the Pakistani authorities. They do it with the Afghans on a regular basis. The people they wanted released are a former interior minister, a former deputy head of defense, a former deputy head of intelligence, a former governor of 2 different provinces. So these are significant Taliban players, or were significant Taliban players. We understand from U.S. authorities that they did not have connections with al-Qaeda. If that had been the case, that, of course, would have made it much harder to contemplate their release. The fact that they're being released to Qatari authorities and under their careful watch, again, is an indication that no one trusts, no one is trusting the Taliban here. But this is a deal that was clearly felt the only way to bring about Bowe Bergdahl's release.
And Barbara, certainly a lot of people celebrating the fact that he will be coming home and he's safe now. But you can't ignore the fact that there are questions surrounding his whole capture back in 2009. I mean, the fact that he sounds like he likely voluntarily walked away from his group. I mean, could he face any ramifications when he does get home for this?
This is a very delicate situation, especially on a day like this, of course, when the president is standing next to his parents to announce the return of this soldier. But the facts are, we don't know exactly what did happen to Bowe Bergdahl because we've never heard from him directly with no duress about what actually transpired. The word has always been that he, for some reason, walked away from his station, from his base in eastern Afghanistan. Perhaps disillusioned with the war, perhaps personal problems. We honestly do not know. The military needs to hear from Bowe Bergdahl directly what happened to him, what led him to walk away. He may not necessarily, I've talked to people about this in the military. There's nothing that says he will face criminal charges, nothing that says there will be some sort of mandatory criminal proceeding against him. He, by all accounts, was absent without leave. Whether it goes as far as desertion, we simply don't know. The military will have to decide how it wants to proceed. But I have to tell you, speaking over the last several months to many senior military officials, they know it's delicate. They know other troops have a lot of questions about this. But there is a very deep feeling that perhaps Bowe Bergdahl suffered enough by being in captivity for nearly 5 years. We'll have to see what decisions are made about his future.
Yeah, I bet a lot of people will say that for sure. Barbara Starr, Nick Robertson, thank you both. Around the world, more than 24 other Americans are being held prisoner in questionable circumstances. At least 27 U.S. citizens are either being held by extremist groups or sitting in jail in countries that are hostile to America. Among them, Robert Levinson, a retired FBI agent who disappeared in Iran almost 7 years ago. His captors sent pictures to his family. Alan Gross is a U.S. government employee in jail in Cuba. Several U.S. officials, including former President Jimmy Carter, have personally pleaded for his release. So far, zero success. And 72-year-old Warren Weinstein, he was working as a government contractor in Pakistan during the summer of 2011 when he was grabbed from his home. He's been held hostage by al-Qaeda ever since. Kenneth Bae was detained in North Korea in November 2012. A North Korean circuit court sentenced him to 15 years hard labor for allegedly committing hostile acts against the state. Joining us now, CNN national security analyst and former CIA operative Bowe Bergdahl. Bob, hello to you. Lots to discuss here. The U.S. was negotiating the release of Bowe Bergdahl for months. Is the U.S. actively pursuing the release of any of those citizens that we just mentioned too, or is it different because Bergdahl is military?
No, in all cases there are back channels, either through directly or through intermediaries, trying to get these people out. You take Levinson, for instance, that's the more difficult one. The FBI, unfortunately, believes that he's died, so we're probably not going to get him back. As far as Cuba, we've got a back channel to Cuba. We're talking to Cuba all the time. I can't call it negotiations. The aid contractor taken in Pakistan and Lahore is being held by Al-Qaeda. That's much more difficult. So all these situations differ. And unfortunately, it just takes time to get through these negotiations.
But, of course, we're not talking about people who have gone through, legitimate proceedings for alleged crimes committed overseas. We're talking about men and women who are hostages or being held for obvious political reasons. Can you explain the distinction?
Well, I think in Afghanistan, what we're seeing now is the end game to this war. The Haqqani group, which supposedly held him, is fairly moderate. We have two channels to the Haqqani group and been talking to them for years. That's Pakistan and Qatar. It's a lot easier for the State Department to work this. Cuba should have been easier in this. I can't explain to you why he hasn't been released. As far as Kenneth Bay and North Korea, well, that regime isn't exactly rational.
Yeah.
So it's all different problems.
So help us understand just a little bit about how this works. I mean, since the U.S. government doesn't negotiate with extremist groups, I mean, what happens when an American is kidnapped and a demand is made? What goes on?
Well, it depends on the group. Al-Qaeda is the most difficult. I mean, we simply, that is a clear-cut terrorist group, but we can no way have any direct contact with it. We can go to a government of Pakistan. They'll say they do their best, but what they actually do is something different. The Haqqani network is the Taliban in a sense. It's an umbrella group. But again, by the way, that's a group that the CIA worked with in the 80s. I mean, we know people in that group. And our estimate is they're fairly rational and easy to deal with. It's the crazies like North Korea and Al-Qaeda where you really run into the problems.
All right, Bob Baer, appreciate your expertise. As always, thank you very much. We want to remind our viewers, about 11 minutes past the hour right now, coming up about 6:15, we are expecting the president to speak from the White House Rose Garden. You see the microphones right there, and he will be joined by Bowe Bergdahl's parents, Robert and Jenny Bergdahl, as you saw CNN's exclusive video of them coming in. We'll have that for you right after this break.